Okay.
Or I can if you want.
No, it's fine. Well, as we know, this is the pre-DCW advisory meeting. We've had meetings for, I think, all the others now, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah. So what we thought we'd do is maybe go through the points that the others have raised. It's all about looking at the guidance documents we produced a couple of years ago for 12 fire critical asset types, and basically seeing if they're still relevant in their current form. Now, they haven't been standing still. They've been on the website and people are making comments, and we've been updating over the last couple of years. But in light of the Fire Safety and Building Safety Acts, it makes sense to see if they need skewing, adding in, taking out, or just changing. So that's kind of the plan. And the idea is to have obviously, we've got an hour at DCW, which is not that great a time, particularly since Dave's like 10 minutes to get seated. So we want to some extent to have that meeting more as a rubber stamp for what's already been determined by these meetings. So that's it in a nutshell. We'll go through what's the findings from the other meetings. Now, Debbie actually had some really good points that she's put in email. Is Debbie coming, George?
I don't know. I've not spoken to her.
She had a few points she raised in the emails that I was hoping to actually raise here. We'll do that perhaps afterwards, if there's time.
Cool.
Yeah.
I've taken the summaries from the other meetings, which I can flash up and we can talk through, if that would help.
That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Be methodical.
Yeah. So let me just hello, Samaya.
Sorry for joining late. I had a bit of an issue trying to get in.
No problem.
Okay. Right. So basically, as Richard's just said, we've run a series of sessions over the last few weeks. So I'm just showing here. This was the summary of what we did with the development group, really to find out where people are on the journey. And what was interesting is that some people have created digital twins, and others are just gathering inspection and asset records and producing a safety case report. What I think was interesting about that is that although clearly that's something that is what the legislation requires, we had quite a good discussion around that, identifying that really the report is only a snapshot in time, and that the legislation actually requires a permanent regime of management that keeps everything up to date. So at any one time, the building safety team needs to be able to access that and ensure that they can both report to themselves and also to the regulator that that the building is safe. So I think that's an interesting dimension on things, that it's not just an aspect of, have we got a fire risk assessment? Have we got a building safety case report? Oh, okay, we're okay for the next 5 years then. Yeah. I don't know whether anybody in this group would have a view on that. I'll just stop there for a second, so I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you look in BS 9999, it has a whole annex of what you should be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm not absolutely sure, but I think 9991 refers to the annex in 9999. However, because I have an inside track on it, there's going to be a complete annex in the new 9991, which tells you how often you should be inspecting. And obviously the implication is if you're inspecting, you should be keeping records. 9991 is, 9999 is pretty comprehensive, and I think a lot of people don't realise how comprehensive it is. And you know, if you're at the wrong end of this, and somebody's saying, well, did you do this every day? Did you do this every week? Then oh, here's Debbie. That you know, there is a great deal to do. I don't know whether anybody's actually even seen it. I can pop it up on the screen if you like.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful for me anyway. I don't know if other people think that.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, sorry for being late.
No, not at all.
Sorry to interrupt as well. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Debbie.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to an event last week at Excel, and it was the Building Safer Futures workshop, and Mark London from Devonshires, who are the lawyers, a specialist in the social space. He was basically saying, because everybody's obviously asking, when are we going to get a more prescriptive set of information requirements, for example? And he said, you basically, there will be a lot more guidance coming through, as Paul just said there. Obviously, that BS 9991 is perhaps an example of that. But what he said was, there's no point in people waiting for that, because actually it's the real legal requirement is that you comply with building regs, and therefore that a lot of the information is already there. But he said there's a tsunami of additional sets of guidance and also regulations actually coming through. So I think the responsibility is very considerable on people to actually get it right, whatever that means.
I think
also some of this guidance is going to be framed by the inputs that they're having from the industry.
That's true.
So it's kind of a catch-22. It's like, well, you can't have the guidance, so you can make the input, because it's your input that's going to be framing the guidance.
Yes. Sorry, Paul.
I'd say I think so I was trying to share my screen and I think it stopped again. But anyway, I'll share it in a minute. But the point is a lot of this guidance is already out there. It's just that people don't know where it is. And also perhaps think, oh, it doesn't apply to me anyway.
Yeah, I'm just interrupting there. I don't think it's they don't know where it is. I think it's they don't wish to an extent know where it is.
Absolutely.
And I think there's an element of it. We're doing the minimum. We're getting through.
Yeah.
And I've heard over the past week or two with Mr. Baker stepping away. Some people think, oh, well, that's all right then, because a new person coming in is going to be gentler. It's going to take a longer time. It's going to be kicked into the long grass, and we're all right. And actually, let's get these building safety cases done. They're going to be one-offs, because everyone's running around like headless chickens to collate this information. If you haven't got it digitalised, and a lot of landlords, social landlords and local authority landlords haven't, so we're running around like headless chickens to get it done. And there you are, like the end of your appraisal. Oof. And that's it. But you need to have them robust systems and processes in place for the golden thread. And my concern is that is not actually happening, because we're in this headlong rush to get this stuff done, but the building blocks they're not actually solid. So
I absolutely agree, Samaya. I think part of the difficulty is that people are obviously, understandably, trying to get through the gateways and get through what the immediate liability is, and that's obviously, you know, a sensible thing to do. You've got to get the, you know, for existing buildings, for example, you've got to get floor plans into the premises information boxes. you've got to have the information about the key assets, and you've got to have a safety case report. But the safety case report is only a snapshot in time.
It is.
I just realised that I wasn't sharing my screen. Sorry about that. But what I think is being missed. I mean, we're working on a project at the moment where the fire stopping information is held in a system, a bolster, and it when we've actually gone and looked at it, they're just the council's just now commissioning a new fire stopping survey, and the new report that's going to come out doesn't relate to the previous one. So therefore, the fire stopping assets that are being inspected, what's actually being recorded in the survey tool, which is creating a golden thread, by the way, you know, that's the way it's being sold. It's creating a digital record, but it's a digital record of the inspection, not of the asset. So therefore, every time a new inspection is done, maybe, you know, every couple of years or something like that, of fire stopping or maybe even fire doors, what you're actually doing is creating a brand new record that's got no relationship with the asset that it related to. Does that make any sense?
Yes, I mean, and that, you know, I've seen the same thing, George, in the fact that somebody's gone round and done an inspection and presented it to the building owner. The building owner's gone back to complain to somebody else that it hasn't been done, that the works, the installations weren't good. So then they've had another report go round, and looking at these two reports, well, there's a few things wrong with them, but trying to tie the product, each individual product together was a little bit difficult, but there does seem to be some sort of asset reference. But then when I look at it and they ask me to comment in it, I'm thinking, well, yeah, but they've missed this and this anyway, because whether they say it's installed properly or not, as far as I can see, it probably isn't. And I think one of the issues is that this whole process is finding so many things that are wrong. Nobody knows what to do about it.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is muddying it even worse than the fact that they've got it all registered, because now they've got it registered, it becomes a problem because they've got to sort it all out.
I'm aware of a block, and this isn't relevant necessarily to where I work, where it's a new build block. It's time to hand over to those who are going to be maintaining it, to the building safety team, the compliance team. They've turned around and said, we're not taking it on. Why is that? Well, we haven't got the information. The people who are handing it over and said, this is the file, this is what the information, we've got all the plans, etc. But the people who are taking it on saying our systems won't accommodate these plans. We can't put these plans in, we can't use these. This isn't systems we use, these aren't the contracts we've got in place. So there still is a lot of disjointed approaches, and that's of concern, considering the, you know, building safety case, the golden thread, and making sure things are aligned and everyone's feeding into each other. It'd be interesting to see how things progress over the next 3 months, in particular, as people are registering their building safety case by October.
Yes. Okay, so shall I crack on?
Jarek's got his hand up.
Oh, sorry, Jarek.
Yeah, just one kind of idea while we've been talking about this missing link, the relationship link between the successive reports. I think maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but considering you've got existing asset and you're managing it through its lifetime, rather than requesting or accepting new reports, you should be, or we should be, pushing for revision of existing and constantly revising existing rather than accepting new, and that then will achieve the link.
I absolutely agree, and I think I'm gonna go on to that as a suggestion, because I think what we should be doing, Jerica, is following proper asset management processes, and that is you've got a building, a defined building that's got an ID. You've got defined spaces in that building, because no asset information is valid unless you've got a location for the asset. So we need to have defined spaces, and then defined systems that are supporting those spaces. And those systems might be smoke control, might be ventilation, might be compartment walls, for example. And then you've got the individual assets that go to make up those systems, and then the products that have been used to satisfy those assets. And if we try and follow that methodology, I think we've got a chance of creating some order into what is a very challenging and chaotic situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. So basically, let's say the owner of the asset has its own requirements to accept and receive information in a certain format.
Yes.
And everyone needs to follow that format, although the format may change throughout the lifetime.
Yes.
But the main driver is the appointing party, the client. And everyone has to just keep revising existing information, that kind of plug and play modular approach. And that will maintain the continuity relationship as well.
Exactly. And if we follow the BIM protocols that have been well established for new build, we can apply those to existing buildings, and therefore we've got a mechanism to glue all that together. Okay, so just pressing on. So this was the result of the development groups meeting. This was the design group, which happened last week. I'll put a preface on there, and that's from the conversation that we had with that Mark London said, the new guidance. But just referring things to building regs, I think is an overwhelming task, because when we did some research on this, we found that building regs requires people to be able to read and understand 800 different standards, and that's obviously being added to as well. So I'm not sure how we address that. I think we need to be able to simplify that in some way.
I think that's the problem, because I think there's a guide to every one of those standards from whoever's involved with it. The problem is if you were to buy, I mean, okay, it's 800 different standards, but say 400 of those are British standards, as a for instance, and
Yes.
they're going to be a minimum of £200 each. The investment alone in buying the standards, so you can even look at them, is huge. And then you've got to rely on the fact that
Is there no commitment for making these things readable?
No.
Why not?
Yeah, there just isn't.
Because if the problem with the standards is, Debbie, is that they're sold to support the management team that uses all our free labour to develop the standards, and that because that's not a free to air thing, which a lot of trade associations are doing things free to air, obviously. There's a few key ones that aren't, who probably ought to be. But again, it means that people have got to change their business models, and I don't think that that's going to happen. But the other thing that you've got to rely on is that the people interpreting the standards, if you've employed them to interpret them for you, are interpreting them correctly anyway, because I'm seeing a lot of things where people just simply quote a standard and don't understand why it can't be met. but oh, it's in the specification. Well, you can't meet it.
I think that you've just hit on a point there, Paul, which is critical. That interpretation of the standard, you can put 3 fire engineers in and ask them, and they will come out with different responses. And you've got a risk with that. I mean, they're not completely off the, the radar, but there will be 3, and there is that risk. And we want the guidance that's going to come out. This stuff is to be where it's clear and away from ambiguity, because those who will want to will try and do the quick win out of it. But it's absolute bonkers to an extent, and with the amount that's coming out and the pace. But the fundamentals, I think, is right, going back to what the chap from Devonshire said and what George is saying, is getting complying with building regs, getting the basics right, the fundamentals, and having that relevant information, which we should have had from years ago, and getting CDM done as we should be getting done.
I agree. I don't think we're going to change. Sorry, Debbie.
Sorry, George. Carry on.
No, I was just going to say that there's so much we can do and there's so much we can't do. And I don't think we're going to see, as Paul was saying there, I don't think we're going to see a change in the way building regs or sorry, the way standards are being released. I think there's, the inertia there is, I think, huge. And even, yeah, I think that's a major challenge. So maybe what we as a little community can do is really have some expert interpretation of the relevant elements for a particular context. Because one of the problems with the standards, any standard, is it's only relevant to that particular solution in that particular context. So I don't think what we're trying to do is take away any liability on people to be managing this situation. They've still got their, designers have still got a liability to be to have use their professional judgment and the available information. So if they're supposed to refer to building regs standards and they don't have access to them, then that's, to some extent, that's something we can't do anything about. But maybe the basics. I'll come on to the example that we were hoping to use for next week, which is really, I'm revisiting the one that we did last year that we've used as a consistent example, just so that we can get people to start thinking along the right lines. The other consistent thing that's being fed back both from the design and the construction group is this whole thing about contractor design portion, and when that information, when that design work needs to be completed. So that the new regulations require information to be, or the design to be completed before construction starts, which in any other industry would be blindingly obvious. But obviously things like building services are often left until halfway through construction. So there's a consensus that seems to be happening. And one of the big contractors was telling me yesterday that they've actually withdrawn from a particular scheme that they were being asked to build because they don't believe the design is adequately complete. Which, that I think is a very interesting development. It's a very brave thing for them to do, I guess. But what they've said to the client was shocked. But what they've said to the client is that the legal liability is just too great for them. Unless the design is complete, then they're taking on too much risk.
Well, it's interesting to see that somebody has actually done that, because the conversations we've had, George, and with my other colleague Paul, if you don't put the space in for the services, then you can't fit them. And where this used to be, somebody solved a problem by putting it in and hiding it and doing something to do the job, they can't do that anymore. That's the main issue. If the building's designed wrong, how do you fit a smoke control system in it?
Yeah, and this is one of the biggest tier ones.
Yeah.
So
well,
hopefully,
I'm pleased to hear that, and but as you say, it's very brave. But we'll see what goes on.
So that's the feedback from the design group. This is the feedback from the operations group. One of the things that we discussed there was that the golden thread has been arguably too successful because we've got dozens. The operations teams are now starting to see that they're getting dozens of golden threads. There's a golden thread for fire doors. In fact, there's a golden thread for the fire door manufacturer, where they're putting a data key into the actual door, an RFID code or whatever, so that pulls back all the manufacturing detail. You've then got a golden thread for the installer, and a golden thread for the inspector. So you've then got 3 golden threads, and unless they all tie back to the same door object, it's the same problem as fire stopping. And then you've got the same for dampers and the other elements as well, which obviously BIM can help with that if we can have common data templates that allow that information all to be federated. Yeah. And then manufacturing, the big feedback that the team are concerned about, they're more than happy to provide the product data, but what they've said is that they were particularly concerned whether the product was actually being installed in the right context. And that's an area that I know Paul McSolly, I've got a meeting with Paul McSolly later from Mace. That was part of what we were trying to do at last year's DCW, which I think became overcomplicated, didn't it, Jarek? David, you were on it as well, weren't you? Hello?
Sorry, George, say that again.
Yeah, I was just saying that what we tried to do at last year's DCW was look at the context in which things like fire dampers and smoke dampers were being installed.
Yeah, it was a good discussion last year. We just ran out of time, really, didn't we?
Yes, but it's very complicated. So
yeah, it is. Yeah.
What Paul McSolly's been doing is been trying to simplify that decision tree process so that there's a mechanism whereby the product selection of the individual asset, or the individual product rather, can also be related to the things that it's going into.
Right.
So
yeah.
One of the thoughts that I've been having is that whether we could include the manufacturers in the selection process, maybe at technical submittal stage, so that when a product is being selected, that is then the manufacturer is informed so that they can see within the BIM model where that particular item is being installed.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
So I've suggested that to a couple of contractors, and they think that's a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sorry, George, you might find that the manufacturers don't think it's a great idea, because there's an issue at the moment about manufacturers getting drawn into being part of the design process. So They put a product on the market and tell you how to install it. If you've then told them you're going to install it in a different way and they miss it, does that then mean that they are part of the design process and therefore culpable? And it's that area is a bit grey at the moment, to say the least.
I think it is, and that is something that has been raised on both sides of the equation. The thing is, though, did Michael Gove not, when he was having the spat with CPA last year, did he not, when CPA took that position, in other words, the manufacturers don't have any responsibility for where the product is installed, my understanding is that Michael Gove said, well, we'll let the lawyers sort that out.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. So there's no decision, so therefore you're unlikely to get any input from manufacturers, because if they're felt to be liable, they're going to be difficult about it. That's only my opinion, but
no, I agree. I mean, I wonder if there's a way of doing it that allows the manufacturer to be part of it without taking on a liability.
yeah.
So to contribute,
it's not. I think if things are straightforward, because and that's not the problem. The issue comes when you're addressing something slightly different and how you go about that process. And at the moment, nobody's wanting to go about that process.
Yeah.
So because of the level of risk of too many people disagreeing with you, so it then comes back down to the somebody has to make a design decision, and if it's not quite exactly as the tested method, and something was to go wrong in the future, we're going through this period where now there's no room for risk. There's no flexibility at the moment, and that's a real problem.
Yeah, because we're in this situation where it's all about risk transfer rather than risk avoidance through collaboration.
Yes, and consistent thought. Yeah, but you see, I see it all the time in the fact that I'll see a fire strategy, and there won't be any justification of it. Oh, we're not going to do that, or it's just a little bit longer, so it doesn't matter. There's no actual calculated support for this, and I think some things like that are going to have to change, but at the moment they don't seem to be doing so. So at one point, because it's obviously an area that the engineers understand, you'll get a whole load of calculations about how many people can get out of the building in time, and then there'll be something like, oh, well, this wall's okay, we don't worry about that, and then that's it. That's the justification, and there's no equal weight put on different changes. So it is very strange. But again, if I think it's with the manufacturers, if they're given a BIM model, they've got to have something through which they can read the BIM model. And in the past, I never had access to that as a manufacturer. And if you misread it or you miss something, is it your fault? Or somebody changes the wall later down the line and you haven't seen the latest, you've got to go back through all this route of saying, well, when we did it, it was right, because you've lost control of the change management. Yeah,
so that needs to be, I mean, those sorts of things in terms of that latter one, I would have thought there is a method that you could follow there. David, would you say you could, I mean, you're more experienced in this than me, could you say that at a point in time that's what it was being assessed at?
I think you can, George. It's just the burden of proof after the event. Who changed it? When did it get changed?
I'm thinking at technical submittal stage. So I think if you did it at technical submittal stage, I think that's a contractual point, really, isn't it? The difficulty is technical submittals are probably too late. Well, we discussed this yesterday, actually. We may not call it technical submittal. It may be, product selection or something like that. It's where you go from descriptive specification to prescriptive specification to actual product, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I'd say I don't. I mean, I'm still seeing specifications that basically say something along the lines of it must have a green line running down here, because they're trying to specify a manufacturer's product. I mean, that's a very simplified version, but it should have stainless steel rivets on the left-hand side, because they're trying to make it so that they have to pick a product. But that's not really got anything to do with its function, because the function is simply down to whether it's tested in that given wall or not. And that, that's very generic. The issue that you've got is that different manufacturers will want different size holes. So it's all very well if somebody selected it and they put in a hole of a certain size.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a size where one size fits all. So it might be that somebody says, well, we'll use that manufacturer, but the hole's too big for them or too small for them.
And that's why without going too far down this rabbit hole, that's why people are saying that the actual product needs to be selected before the holes are created.
Yeah, but then I have another sort of concern about that, because if you've seen if one manufacturer's got a bigger sales force than another, and they've been around and done a really good job, and all these projects fall at the same time, that one manufacturer isn't going to have the capacity to fulfill the orders that it needs for all the work it's got. So at some point there will always be this thing where somebody will have to go elsewhere to get something, because they have no choice. Do you understand what I mean? If somebody does a really, really good selling job, they're not going to have, and they're in there, suddenly in 6 months' time, potentially they're the only people who are going to have any work.
I guess
does that make sense?
Absolutely. I guess the problem is that we've got to try and deal with the 80% rather than the 100%, haven't we? Yeah. So if we can do the 80%, because the problem is at the moment, I think a lot of things get changed, probably not for those type of reasons, but for others. Okay. So the approach, I think, would address certainly some of these issues with the asset information, is that I think that BIM, for example, should tell us where things are. That's fairly obvious, and I think that's something that we ought to be making sure that we've at least got all that information. And I know that seems blindingly obvious, but we're still coming across projects where the spaces haven't been properly defined, and we've got COBie data where assets aren't tied back to spaces, or assets aren't tied back to spaces, and products aren't related to assets. So I think those are fundamental principles. But the other aspect is that, as Richard was saying earlier, we obviously did all that work a couple of years ago on the 12 key asset types, and we've actually got those which we're revisiting at the moment to get them up to date. But in most cases, there's at least 10 pages of information required, and partially that's because whoever you talk to on the asset side of things, they will have a different set of information. Samaya, for example, her perspective of safety, she will want different information than maybe somebody that's looking at life cycle replacement. And the same from a point of view of design. We've got, actually, specification should be in that list. So you've got the information that's needed for each of those different elements. Everybody's got a different level of information requirement, and therefore what we should be doing is making it so that that information can then be filtered and presented according to the particular viewer, which is, from an information management point of view, straightforward to do, but we've just got to make sure that we're capturing the asset information in a way that can then be updated. So my suggestion for what we're looking to do next week is to have something where we take the example that we used last year, and that is, we've got basically, in this particular case, it's student accommodation, but it doesn't really matter. So you've got a fire breaks out here. You've seen this probably, all of you, many times, but I'll just talk it through. The point is, we've got a fire breaks out here, and the hazard is the spread of smoke. And therefore, you've got three measures that are in place: the compartment, you've got smoke control, and you've got detection. And the question is, or that we tried to answer last year, was what information do we need to know about these assets to ensure that when the building, or when the scenario happens, that it will actually perform. So I was thinking of looking at what the various different working groups were asking, and then relating it to these three areas. Now, Jarek and I have spoken this morning about trying to interpret what those requirements are into something that is then a specific question we could ask the group to the groups to manage. But I don't know if I'll shut up now. Has anybody got a view on that? Does that make sense?
Can I jump in?
Please.
So this, what we're looking at, what we've done last time, I think, don't get me wrong, but I think it was like a good old playground where not that well opportunity was missed to gain much more out of so many people who were there with such a good ideas.
Agreed.
We talked about this for a long time. What we need is to summarize what we know, then make everyone aware what we know, where we are, and ask specific questions, what and how questions, for the specific items which we know already the problems, and we should maybe even, because there's not enough time. The time went so fast.
Yes.
So we really need to be so specific. We need to choose what questions we want to ask, only the most important, and we need to ask specific questions so we get the answers. Otherwise, it will be a missed opportunity. It will be a good PR event, but
No,
not,
I'm agreeing
not
with
as
you, Jarek.
beneficial as it could be.
I agree. So how do you think we might go about that?
So while listening, and also apologies because I wasn't really involved in the last 3 months because of our workload, but listening to what you said, I made some notes, and let me just go through them. So the questions based on what we just discussed, I would, for example, ask. So, for example, one problem is people don't know where to go, where to look for guidance. Question: how do we simplify guidance and access? Another issue: continuity of reporting is broken. And then, so I then suggested maybe we should propose revisions. And if we agree with that, how do you achieve this? Question like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned, George, that the records at the moment are a snapshot in time, not the live data.
Yeah.
So therefore, question should be, how do we make the information live? And by the way, while you've been talking about all of this, all the time, each time in my back of my mind, there was a common data environment as the glue of all of this information. And I
Sure.
believe reading all this research I've done and so on, it seems like the client, the appointing party, should own that CDE, and only then it can be efficiently managed. You can then make the supply chain to do what you want and access information. It's there. Although, as in relation to BIM and the maintenance operation of the building, that part is the least developed and there's lots of problems with it. So I'll leave it like that for now. To go back to my questions, Sam and Paul mentioned that there's the cost of standards, because of the volume of them, 800 plus standards, the cost of them and accessing them is prohibitive. That links to the first question I mentioned. So simple question should be, how do we resolve this? We may get very good ideas if we ask questions that way. Present specific problems and ask specific questions. But first describe, because some people may not know, or we all know what we discussed so much. There's a couple more.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Go on.
I think we've got to be very careful here, because I totally agree with you what you're saying in the questions, but I think there's not a cat's chance in hell in getting those answered in 45 minutes.
Well,
Yeah.
last time we spoke about this, at least the table I was at, didn't really have anything specific.
I'm not suggesting we do it like last year. I agree we've got to have the questions, but I think rather than just having the questions, to some extent, there's got to be an element of we would like answering the questions and getting agreement and extra input, rather than just going in cold with the questions, because they don't have time to answer. At the time of the discussion, you won't get any answers, and you certainly won't get through 5 or 6 questions.
Yeah, I think Jarek agrees with you there. It's a matter of determining what those simple questions need to be.
Absolutely, but I'm just saying. Sorry, go on.
I've been sitting here listening as well, and I'm looking at this, and I'm just trying to put it all into some sort of perspective. Now, the point is that the designer should know about compartmentation and smoke control and detection. Now, they have to know about that, otherwise they can't design this. Now, that's the fundamental problem with regard to this. And then when you go under compartmentation, you've got a whole load of separate products. And when you look at those products, the people who supply them, generally speaking, are the experts. And we'll have a load of experts around the table. I know we will, because I sat with fire door people. I'm a damper person, as you know, and smoke control. And the point is that the designer is the one who has to put it all together, because mostly, and I suppose I sit on both sides of the fence a little bit, because that's what's occurred for me. So I know about smoke control design, and I know how to select the products, but I then would go to the people to get the products. But the issue that we have here is that the designers and specifiers just know that they need a thing, but they don't know what the constraints that apply to their design about that. And I think that's the issue. So last year we all sat round and we all said fire doors need to do this and dampers need to do this. Well, we all know that. But the point is how do we educate the designers? I think is probably the issue.
That's an interesting point. I think that make. I mean, if it's a matter of how do the experts educate the people that need to use their expertise, and indeed how do the clients procure that, that might be a simpler question to tackle in 45 minutes.
Can I just jump in? I think all points said are relevant, and I think what Paul said was hit nail on the head. Those specifying and those designing, there's a lack of communication there, and then you've got the client. Client says, "I want this," and the architect's designing and going, right, this is what we've got. Designers coming along, designers going, yep, this is perfect. Not speaking to manufacturers or the people who are going to maintain it and who's going to be using it at the end. Is it going to be suitable? Can we use this? How's it going to work? And can we readily get the parts? So I've been involved with certain developments where certain compartments, ridiculous compartments, when I say compartments, I don't mean compartment more, but components, sorry, should I say, we're having to wait to 12, 15 weeks for a small part, but we could have got them from the UK or somewhere else. So there's a disconnect there, and there needs to be that communication. I think what we've got, the risk slight thing is we're very focused, which is great, but there's more silo.
I agree.
And we need to get that web.
Yes.
Thank you.
Because so I look at that drawing, George, as you well know, and I say, well, there's a fire door there, and then a load of people will know about fire doors, but they won't know how that ties in with the smoke control system. They might have a rough idea about how it works with compartmentation, but then you've got to make sure that the compartmentation isn't ruined by the smoke control. And these things just go round and round, but it does fundamentally mean that somehow or other the designers need to know how to design, and I'm not convinced that they do.
So, sorry to barge in again. So that's why, because we've got limited time, because we know what the problems we want to tackle and talk about, we should be asking how or what questions, and specific, to use the time we have. Otherwise, we end up with very good conversation.
No, I agree. So those questions about how and what, I'm not sure about the why. I'm big into whys, Jarek, very much so. But
I think how is probably the best question, which was mentioned a lot of times during this conversation.
Yeah,
it seems like it's a good question to ask, and then we may actually have a very good ideas which we can do something about. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of useful information which will be overloaded with, and it's just too much to deal with.
yes. So if we talk about how as a process, rather than the what, which is the detail of the information about all those different asset types, that might be a good way of doing that. And it's that cascading, isn't it? Of how does the looking at it from the bottom, how do the operations team inform everybody about what their requirements are? How do the manufacturers provide the information in an effective way to designers? How do the designers provide the make sure that the client's aware? Is that the sort of thing that we could?
Yeah, I think that's perfect. It's like, how do we prevent wrong product installed? How do we prevent the right product installed incorrectly? Those sorts of questions, and that we may have a brilliant answers and additional ideas and so on, but we actually may achieve some solutions, or we'll have a very solid, hopefully, kind of headers to work with and actually do something and finalize something.
Yes.
Well,
I'm going to stop sharing now because I'm just sharing at that.
I think that's probably a good question is, how do we ensure that products are selected and installed correctly? And maybe it's as simple as that, because everybody will say, we all provide our information, it's up to them to read it. So I know what the answer to that bit's going to be. But the point is how do we prevent incorrect selection and design? Sorry, incorrect selection and install. How do we prevent it?
So what's the question? How do we ensure that
How do we prevent
products are,
the incorrect selection and installation of fire resisting products?
would you say specification also, or it's more the selection?
It's designed for and installation, because if they're not designed for, then you can't select them. And then the second part is, because of the wrong design and because of the wrong selection, they're installed incorrectly.
What do you think, Jarek?
I think it sounds very sensible. Also, from a competencies perspective, if there's no point interpreting product information unless it's the correct information, yes, to determine if there's any specific competency requirements. So, you know, if you have no trust in what someone provides on that, because we can make sense of that product data from a competency perspective. We'll have new capabilities to show that soon. So you can link this product information and specification to the target competency profiles of the installers. So it has another advantage if we can get this. Sorry, it's a bit tangential, but it is important. Otherwise, I'm wiring to something that isn't useful.
Yes. So Maya, from your perspective as a client, what would that be useful from your perspective?
I think
also?
it will be useful. Cost comes into it a lot, George.
Of course.
First thing is, we're going to have this. It's fantastic. Looks great. Crack on. Starts to design. Starts to build. Oh, it's actually costing us this. Can we get around this now? What's the best way? Can we cut another, 100k off this? Okay, well, I'll tell you what. We'll go for this. So we've had developments whereby we've created and confined spaces. You can't access the plant suitably at all.
Yes.
And so I think the more information, but the clearer the information, the clearer as to why you select a particular product, what the two connects need to be with the design and the selection. I think that is key critical, because unfortunately, as much as there's lots of industry standards and various things, there are some bodies who require a professional body to come out and state something in writing and say, look, good industry people have got around the table and this is what they've come up with. And that actually has more benefit and is accepted and used widely, because it's seen as, right, okay, we don't need to go and do this interpret. Someone's already gone through and this is what the industry. So I think that would be really helpful, because it's happening on a daily basis, what the designer decides and what's actually being installed, because it wasn't going to be suitable because the designer's living in cloud cuckoo land in some instances. And I don't mean that in a, that they're off their head or out like that, but there's just such a disconnect at times. And I think that thing of sitting around the table and just getting to the basics is a miss.
I agree. I mean, one of the interesting things with that is that, just picking up on what you're saying there, the role of BIM4Housing is, I mean, obviously we're just a community, aren't we? So we've got no real traction. But it was interesting. Tina Mystery wrote something this morning, and she was basically saying that just having a tick box against something isn't the way, and fundamentally agree. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do with this whole risk-based approach. But what was interesting is that if we can go down that track of having, I mean, I was talking with Paul McSolly this morning, Paul, and he was saying that I think everybody's seen some of the work maybe not Jade yet, but they've seen some of the work that he's been doing with the passive fire group, and what they've been doing is really good work in terms of how the decision trees are for how things are being selected to create things. He said, but one of the challenges is that people are being they're being very protective about it being released. So he's putting a load of work into this. And should it be Mace that puts it out? Should it be should it be Balfour Beatty or whatever? So we're having a conversation later to see if there's a way that we could do that. Does that make sense?
Tell him I'll put it out, George.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Right. So I think that's been really helpful from my perspective. I think we're getting there. I think if we can, if we take that as a title, would you mind just writing that up? I don't mean asking you to do a lot, but write up the sentence that you've just articulated, Paul. Put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'll try and put something in the chat if I can remember what I said.
Yeah, but I think if we can then use that and then relate it back to, as Samaya is saying there, fundamentally, we need to make sure that for the right product to be specified and provided, we've got to have the right space, haven't we? The space has got to be right. The systems have got to be right that those products are going into, and the information about the asset has got to be recorded as well. So it goes back to the principles that I was suggesting earlier, that we follow the asset management protocols and say, right, you've got building, space, system, and asset. And I think that provides the hooks for us to tie all this stuff into. Would you agree with that, Jarek?
Yeah, I do agree. And what the few people who did mention the question, I think if we could get more how questions from each of us,
yeah,
at least then,
I'm sorry, I was
then
just going to
decide.
say, Jarek, could you
decide
put your
which ones.
questions in the chat? The questions you've got. Could you put
Yeah,
those in
okay.
the chat for us? So we've got
I'll do
those.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's just have a look at what Paul's done there.
I think the point is we're talking about DCW, but if there are these valid questions being raised, such as Jarek's, they still need answering at some point, don't they?
I missed that. Sorry, Richard.
I wouldn't know where to start,
obviously...
Richard.
Sorry?
I wouldn't know where to start with that.
Yeah,
there are so
like
many
these kind of challenges at BIM4Housing. I said to Jarek, we're looking for something we can do in the time at DCW, but Jarek's questions, if they're valid, then which they are, then obviously at some point they need answering, don't they?
Yeah. I mean, I think in summary of Paul McSorley's, which pretty much goes for all the passive fire type protection products and some of the smoke control ones as well, is the first thing is what wall have you selected? And then the next thing is, have you provided enough space around your penetrations to allow the seals to be installed? And it isn't actually any more complicated than that. The problem is that the dimensions are different in every case, and how to, I think you've heard me say, space is the word that I always use. You've got to provide space to fit the services, and you've got to look at these things, because you just put a 600 by 600 duct on a drawing, you think that's the hole it goes in. Well, it isn't. It's going to be 700 or 800 by 800. And then you can't run pipes close to it, and you can't do this and you can't do the other. And this is the problem, that nobody considers the space for the services. The only thing they consider is lettable space.
But Paul, totally agree. And this comes back to my point earlier, what I said about the PD, CDM. These are the things that the principal design needs to be factored in about specification, about the items that are going to be used, the maintenance of it, the supply, the servicing. And we are having a lot of fundamental bloody problems, excuse language, in this, and that's why building safety coming along. It goes back down to that. And I'm on a board of a development company, and we've got developments taking place. And when we look at the site and the issues that have arisen, and the HSE have got involved, on the risk register, the PD is not considered at all. And you want to bang your head, and then you've got the EA. So these people have key critical role to play right from the onset. Don't expect them to have the knowledge, the niche, but they need to identify these, because these are risk, and they need to factor these in, as in how they're going to manage and control them. We won't have these issues then. I've got a 600 mil, but the part that I've ordered is for 900 mil, and actually what was specified was 1200. Do you see? And I think, so we can have lots of guidance. We can have, look, this is the questions need to be asked, but we need to getting back to that bloody fundamental again, and getting these people to understand and get your job done. And you haven't got the idea, go and speak to them suppliers, go and speak to them manufacturers, speak to them and find out. But we just haven't got that. And then, so we are putting in bits. We're trying to build in them building blocks. And when I said about the web, but we need it glued, we need it solid, because it is that PD who needs to do the critical role. But I just don't think it's happened well.
No,
anyway,
and it's I don't know whether we're going off track slightly, but it is a bit of that, because obviously the architect's been tasked with maximizing lettable space in a lot of instances, and then of course somebody comes back and says, well, you can't have all that lettable space, we've got to put this in. And then it just goes back, well, sort it out, we don't need all that really, do we? Tell us where it, and this is, I've heard this so many, tell me where it says I have to do that. And the answer to that is, you have to do it because you need to be a proper designer. These things are getting lost a lot. So, yeah.
But could I just ask, in manufacturing industry, in the car manufacturing industry, there are standardizations, I believe there are standardizations for the size of products that are going in. So if somebody's making, I don't know, alternators or something like that, presumably there's a degree of standardization in terms of the connections and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Yes, I think there is, George. But again, the problem that you've got is that we have to do a fire test. So if it's that sort of product, and we just take a penetration seal around pipes and cables, you need a certain volume of the material that you put round them to make sure that you get the insulation and the fire doesn't just conduct through the pipes. So the point is if somebody's putting a load of bigger pipes, then you might need more material or less material. And so therefore, they're putting
in bigger pipes because they need it because of the design.
Yes, yeah, but what I'm saying is there might be 2 big pipes or 5 little pipes, but around those you've got to have a certain volume of material. So you might have to be an inch above and an inch below or something like that. You can't just say, oh, we've got 20. I think pipes are still measured in imperial, so we've got 20 half-inch pipes. Therefore, the penetration seal will always be the same, because you don't know what centers they've been put in on, and it could be going for a triangle or an oblong or whatever it is. And people are, it's certainly the same with dampers. Products have developed over the years, and we've now got we're using more flexible walls, and you have to do something to the product to make sure it passes the test. And if that's putting gaps in around it or extra seal around it, that's why your hole could end up a different size.
But is that not partially? Is that flexibility of alternatives, being able to have all of these alternative solutions? Is that not at the heart of the problem?
Well, if everybody built the same wall, it would never ever be a problem. It's the issue with the different types of walls, to be honest, that makes it more complicated. But that, combined with the products being of a different manufacturer, means that the problem sort of multiplies.
Yeah, we've got to be careful, haven't we, that we don't just end up just complaining about the way the industry works. We need to come up with some. I mean, certainly, offsite manufacturing has been, held up as being part of the solution for a long time. Obviously, yeah, L&Q. Not
The
L&Q,
issue with that
sorry.
is you've got
legal and general.
L&G, yeah.
Yeah.
You've got a whole bunch of hidden cavities, and you've got stuff going through there that's potentially not protected. So that is a huge problem that needs solving.
I think that's another not another kettle of fish, but that's another bunch there that needs to be. And I don't think it's going as where it's meant to be going and stuff.
They're not getting a good track record at the moment when somebody actually manages to set fire to something. So, but you say, because there's too many routes for the fire to get around everything, and there's a huge hidden cavity between each thing, and that's not necessarily adequately protected. Anyway, different story, George. Don't go there at the moment.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so as far as next week is concerned, because that's obviously our focus. I think have you put those in there, Jarek? You've put the questions in there?
Yeah, there's Jarek's questions,
Yes,
and mine one's just above that. Yeah.
Okay. Have you got anything, Samaya, that you could add to those? So your area would be probably ensuring, based on your experience, what would your how be?
Let's have a look at how do we get people to sit around the table and talk to each other? That's not something we can put out there. No. There is. Can I come back to you on that to see how best we can? Because for me, I think I know the question and I know the answer without sounding arrogant. It's getting that better communication between those who are as I've been saying, between the designers, the client, and the ones who are going to be the specialists, the installers, and getting them around and saying, because there's so much going out there, there's so much in the industry, and people are looking for solutions, carbon neutral, etc., cheaper products on the market. By the time you've specified something and it comes round to it, it's 18 months later. Yeah. And there's new, not new requirements, but there's new products which are better and easier or might be more suited. How do we go about it then? So I'm not quite sure what.
Can I jump in?
Please.
So I'm thinking, because there's so many people on this event and there's so many experiences, and I think if we, obviously it's difficult, but if we ask questions which would be able to coax out from those people solutions they're already implementing, that would be really valuable and very good event to get information of, this is the problem, how do you actually deal with that? We may actually be surprised, amazed what people are already doing, and then we can tweak it and make it better, or accept it as it is. We may actually really learn something.
That. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. Yeah. So how are you doing it? Yeah. First of all, do you agree with the question? Yeah. And secondly, how are you doing it? Or how do you plan to do it?
So they must be doing it. No, what I mean is, Paul, by that is, how do they do it currently? As in, how they're not getting around it, but how they're dealing with it, because this is on a daily basis. It's not. I'm not saying that's the ideal way to do it, but
yeah.
Every specification that I see around smoke control and dampers is essentially wrong. So they're not getting around it. They're getting around it by listing every single possible standard and saying comply with all these, whether they're relevant or not. So there's a huge learning curve for, shall we say, designers or consultants to go through, because I mean, I even saw a specification last week referring back to a British standard for a BS476 part that's never been relevant to that product. And never was, even on this project, which was 20 years old. It was wrong then.
Debbie's got a question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
well, but surely this is also to do with who's accountable for what. They shouldn't be pushing that down the line. That's the accountability issue. You know, that should be checked beforehand. So I think there's an element of doing what you're accountable to do here, yes? And I find a lot of people in the industry, they don't understand the difference between accountability and responsibility, very simply, yes? So how do you manage risks? So, you know, that somebody receiving that should just reject it. You know, they shouldn't even accept it, because it's not their responsibility. It's the other, you know, their responsibility might be to interpret it and go back for questions, but it's not, they're not accountable for writing the spec.
No, but that's the point, Debbie. Unfortunately, it just gets pushed down. I mean, I did discover at some point that the design of the smoke control had been somehow or other put down to the ductwork contractor. But it's not realistic.
If they have competency management in place, you should have trace in your information that you've actually handed that off, that accountability off. There needs to be traceability. It's part of the golden thread.
Debbie, that sounds great, and I think Paul will agree. For me, one of the key is the competencies. These people do not have the competency to look at a plan, to look at a spec and go, no, and they haven't got the confidence there. And in some cases, unfortunately, they don't have the backing.
Yeah. It's leadership, isn't it? There's a sort of governance and leadership issue here.
Element,
but to me, if I was somebody who was a smart installer, being told, right, you know, you're installing the product X and Y and all the rest, I go back to them and say, what is the competency demand profile for that product that I've got to install? Because it's your job to provide it. That's how you push back. We need the bottom of the chain pushing back upwards. They've got every right to demand that. They can demand what's the competency profile I should have to install that product.
But the danger is for them commercially, Debbie, that they don't have it in the first place, so why would they dare to ask for it? And they daren't walk away from the work.
But if we don't push both directions, we've got no chance. I know.
I completely understand, but these guys are paying the mortgage. That's why they take the work.
Yeah. But you know, but at the end of the day, the accountability piece is, and you know, is so important in terms of the golden thread. It's one of the key things, and it's not being understood.
Derek.
Yeah, sorry to barge in again. I mean, competency and accountability are probably one of the two biggest issues in construction industry in general. Therefore, I don't know if we want to discuss this there, because don't know how much we can achieve. They are very important, but I think need to manage expectations and time. And now a question to Paul: when you said no one is managing the issues specific to you, I think, would that be fair to say that they do manage it, but they are the wrong end at the handover of the building, and then they try to come up with various explanations of why we think we're compliant?
I'm seeing that, but I'm also seeing it the other way, that the designs aren't coming through yet that are good. We've also got all the legacy projects where they probably weren't necessarily designed in that way, and maybe that's going to stop. But people have woken up to discover that they have received this responsibility and accountability through the contracting chain, and now they're stopping. and saying, hang on, exactly as Debbie said, this is wrong. We can't do this. We can't take that liability. But of course, because they've taken the liability and somebody's already signed the contract, it's, well, actually, you can do what you like. We don't care anymore. Yeah, but we based this on your design. Well, you shouldn't have done, should you? You've got design responsibility. Do it yourselves. So we've still got all that to go through. And then, of course, because they're in this position, the commercial side of the business is then trying to pass it down still further. And they're passing. So essentially, I don't think you're supposed to pass down a contract to somebody when you know they can't do the work. Now, I don't think contractors have ever said they're going to be designers. However, they've got all these design and build contracts. So the whole thing is just a complete mess at the moment. And then, but the trouble is they're finding out on the job at the moment, and so therefore they're coming up to mitigate it. And then on so the one that I mentioned, which is with, you know, let's try and use some 20-year-old dampers on this project. It's like, who in there, right? Oh, well, we're accountable, but this person doesn't seem to be actually available. Oh, we've all agreed that that's all right. And I'm just thinking, how? What tells you that you're competent without I didn't really want to use that word, but what says, how can you say it's like putting 20-year-old brakes on your car? Would you do that? Would you know, if you were refurbishing a car, would you put new brakes on it or leave 20-year-old brakes on it?
That would be perfect introduction for the next week event. Perfect. Yeah.
So you know, I mean, the point is, I have to try and write something down about this, and I'm trying not to laugh, but it's very, very serious.
Paul, you could write a whole book on this. I wish I'm away next week out of the country. I wish I was going to be present there. Unfortunately, I'm not. But Paul, I think you've got to bring this in, because this is what's happening, and there should be some people hanging their heads in shame, because that's what happens. Yeah. And we're laughing about it now because it's true and accurate, but it is hugely concerning, and it's costly.
It's costly. It's risky.
It's massively costly.
But I think that's the point. It isn't costly
if you do it right in the first place.
No, but it's not costly because actually it's saving money. So it's not costly. The issue is if it goes wrong in the future.
Of course.
That's when the cost comes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's costly by them not doing it right in first place, and therefore then it ends up being costly. That's what I meant. So if you do it right in first place, you're not going to have that. If you look at some of the new bills that have gone up, and I find this hilarious. I don't live that far from central London. I was up in town last night, and some of the new bills that have been completed, let's say in the past 8 months or so, scaffolding's gone up already. The roofs. The roof space, which is usually flat roofs, have got a guarantee, a warranty. They've been null and void within 6 months of someone going up there and cutting a bit out and doing hot bitumen works and whatever and stuff. And so that golden thread, that information, some of these stuff, and some of the works lot haven't even come off, and the scaffolding going up, and there's someone drilling through the wall and stuff. And I know that's completely different. Point is, things weren't done right in the first place, in the sense the spec wasn't right, it wasn't thought out and all the rest, and therefore we've got these issues now carrying on, and scaffolders are loving it, and so are contractors. I tell you, there's no shortage of work in central London. Anyway, there we are.
No, that's true.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the format of the event next week, Paul, what I was planning to do was open up with a bit of a PowerPoint, just illustrating this. But if you could do 5 minutes on what you've just said.
Well, I'm not. I have to be careful because, of course, I'm not sure I can actually say that out loud in front of a lot of people because I don't know what they're going to do, and therefore.
But use your 20-year car analogy. I think you've got to use that, Paul. Things like that.
The trouble is, I think if there was anybody there who was working on that project, they might guess what I was talking about.
Well, only they know.
Paul, I'll fight for you. You say what you want.
Yeah, I mean, this is all about behaviour and cultural change. You know, this is This comes back to Dame Judith Hackett, you know, to
Right.
the nub of it. This is about behavior change, taking responsibility, you know, being willing to act, you know, and shine a light on something that you haven't done before, you know. It's you can't.
Oh
you
no,
can't
I
just
you know,
hide
I
away
know
from
all the
it.
reasons why it should be done. It's just
y-
impossible to see that anybody thought that it wouldn't be.
Yes.
It just wouldn't have crossed my radar until it happened. So
Have
yeah.
you got any examples like that, Jarek? For the wrong product being selected?
I've got lots of examples, but they are electrically biased. I would have to think about making them fire safety. I think about it.
Yeah, I don't think it's an
Even
issue with it.
electrical, I think, wouldn't be
I
an
mean-
issue because electrical can lead to fire-related matters, can't it? I mean, a lot of fires do due to electrical dodgy electrics or incorrect specification overloading or bypassing.
Yeah.
The thing I think that's consistent in terms of what we're saying here is the information requirements need to be, or we need to provide something that's specific and explicit, don't we? I think rather than relying on people interpreting standards, we need the specification to be as explicit as possible and becoming increasingly explicit as the design develops. Is that a fair thing to say?
Oh, I think so. I think it needs to be being narrowed down as you go through the design. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just you were talking about. I was going to show you that brief excerpt from 9999, and if you've got
Yes.
just a couple of minutes, if I share that with you.
Yes,
Now,
please.
this could be a little bit more specific, but if I don't believe anybody follows this, but anyway, I will show it to you. And yet it's a British standard that's been in the public domain since 2017. So let me just share it again.
I apologize,
what
but I
Liz-
need to go. I'll see you later. Thank you for a great conversation. See you later.
Thanks, Jarek. Cheers.
Can everybody see that?
Yes, I can.
Right, so routine inspection and maintenance of fire safety installations, that can't be clearer.
Yeah.
Then we have daily inspections, fire detection alarm systems, any fault recorded the previous day has received attention. How many times have we seen toilet rolls of print out inside panels? Emergency and escape lighting, sprinkler systems. Fire door automatic release, they should be released daily.
Really?
Bottom one.
Yeah.
And I think this was in the previous version as well. Then you have weekly, everything that should happen daily, fire sprinkler systems.
Paul, do we have to buy this standard?
Yes.
Okay, how much is it?
I think this one's expensive because it's a lot of pages, 400 pages. So it'd probably be £400. But it is the fire strategy design guide for office blocks. This one.
Yeah.
Then you have monthly. And the point is, you can copy this down. It's. I mean, I'd copy it. It's probably in my book actually, Debbie, if you want to read it. But and then you have 6 monthly, and it says things should be inspected by whatever, and then yearly. And
I want to extract it, make it machine readable.
well, I mean, anybody can copy
that.
and paste it if they have a thing. But
No.
But you see, I from the point of view, what I'm saying is I don't think that could be any more specific, and yet I don't think anybody does any of that. Yes. And the point is you should be keeping a record of everything that you've done.
Yes.
Because if you found a fault and you haven't fixed it, you should know you haven't. And again, the point is anything that you find in here now, if it's an HRB, you should be reporting to the fire brigade. So these things are no longer hidden up. There's a lot to do.
Absolutely.
But that standard, I don't think can be much more specific. I've rewritten it a bit for the new 9991 residential one because I think that smoke control's not delivered. But if you take the spirit of it, basically, if there's any faults on a smoke control system, shouldn't you be checking for them every day? Wouldn't it be better if somebody installed an automatic system? Yes, it's more expensive, but if there's an issue with it and it's in the back of beyond down by the canal and it's got 6 flats in it, it will send you a text. You can do all this stuff now, and it can tell you that there's an issue. But and I think I've also said before, smoke control systems and damper control systems generally have an inherent fault in the fact that they're whilst they're an active system, they don't do anything until they receive an alarm. So they're sitting there. You won't know if anything's wrong unless you've been and tested it, or maybe within the software there's a self-test regime that every Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock it just opens and closes everything individually just to make sure it gets to its end switches or the fans start up. It's so easy to do. Relatively speaking, in the cost of a building, it's not expensive, but it's just a situation that we find ourselves in. Anyway, sorry, soapbox. Boom.
So that could be one of the hows, couldn't it? How do we check on a regular basis that the collective systems are working in concert?
Yes. Yeah.
That could be a good one, couldn't it? And you've got an answer to that.
I'm gonna have to go.
Yes,
apologies.
I am as well. Sorry to
No,
keep
thank
you
you.
over. So.
That's okay. Thank you very much. It's really helpful. I hope
so
it all
Maya,
goes well next week. Yes.
Do you think anybody else from Ealing may be able to join us?
I at present they're going through further restructure. I don't
Oh dear.
no, I don't think so at present. Yes, the fire safety manager left last week, and I understand they're in the process of recruiting a new building safety people, and their new head of building safety hasn't yet started. So it's all in the yeah.
Cool.
Okay, super. All right. Take care.
Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Cheers.
Jade, are you going to? We'll send you the invite to come
Thank you.
next week, and
Yeah, no, I've already responded to you, George. So
no, absolutely.
I'll see you there on Thursday.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Oh,
Thank you.
Paul, is there anybody? It may be because Will Perkins has said that he may not be able to come. Do you know anybody else that does AOVs that might be a good candidate?
I know candidates, but I'm not sure that they could do it like Will would do it, because Will's Will. I mean, I can sit in on that one if you want me to, if you want to stand in.
Okay. Yeah, I need somebody to sort of coordinate that, and as you say, Will's quite good at that. So if
I'm happy to act as a coordinator. I think at this stage there isn't anybody else who's really been involved in this that understands what we're doing. So
no, sure. Thank you.
But yes, I can do that if you. Yeah, I'll be around from probably, I don't know, 11:15 anyway. So
cool.
we've got Firex up the way, so I'll be in there to start with. So yeah.
Cool. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers.